So, May is Mental Health Month. And I want to talk about in this episode something that happens after life's biggest transitions. I know I've had it when my husband passed 10 years ago, and it's something really real, something common, and something that almost nobody names out loud. So, here's what I keep thinking about because I had such a tangible experience when my husband passed. As I think about retirement, I'm thinking I've worked for 27, 28 years. I've built something, I think, a career, some reputation, a specialty, and my life has a certain shape to it and a certain feeling. And there's people I see every day in it that mean something to me. And my fear is when I retire, I guess if I make that decision the next 2 to 3 years, will it be the right decision? And I think some people, when they do make this decision, it feels like the right decision. But somewhere in my imagination, in the weeks or months after I choose to do that, and maybe it's not immediate, maybe it's a slow process, and I feel like something has shifted. Maybe I feel like my mornings are long, the house feels quiet, and I find myself wondering, what am I going to do today? How can I stay connected to the people that I miss? I've tried to do that with a couple of friends now that have moved on to further their careers. I've reached out several months in a row to say, hey, let's get together. And somehow it just hasn't worked yet. So I keep wondering, is that what's going to happen when I retire? Will I not really have the kind of engagement with people that I used to have? And I can't really name what this is. It feels like a heaviness. I know that's what happened when my husband passed. I felt a numbness of not knowing what to do every day. And I really had such a question mark of how to make sense of what my life was now that I wasn't married to a man who needed my care every day because he had multiple sclerosis. And so I'm fearful that maybe quietly or privately, because I won't say anything, I'll wonder if I retired too soon. If any part of that resonates with you as you're thinking about retirement or planning for retirement or your way of spending your time, then this episode is for you. I'm MC, I'm a health psychologist. I work in research and chronic pain, and I'm most interested in exploring and being curious about longevity and health and well being and how we can be the very best version of ourselves well into our 80s and 90s. And if this is something that really clicks with you, please join me, subscribe, share. I would love to see you here each week. So, to talk more about this situation, I want to be honest about the issues that surround depression, grief, and potentially how we could possibly regret retiring and what that might look like. And what does the evidence of research tell us? I think that one of the reasons I feel this is very personal to me is I feel like I haven't retired yet, but I feel like I've gone through something like this with my husband passing 10 years ago. And I guess that's why, as the time becomes closer that I'm thinking about retirement, I just am worried or concerned about what my identity will be. I've been such a researcher and curious over the past so many years and helping people pull together their research projects that are so fascinating and interesting. And I'm not sure what's going to happen when that role no longer exists. And it makes me think about how when my husband passed away, my role as a caregiver no longer existed. And there was such a numbness that I felt and an uncertainty of what to do. And I don't even think I talked about it to anyone, but I distinctly had a recollection of what that feeling was. And truthfully, it was deeply disconcerting. And I really remember how hard it was to go through. And I also know that some of the high achieving people that I work with, guess what? They didn't retire. In fact, some of the scientists that I know, they literally die working. They don't retire. They keep going. So somehow, is that supposed to be the way I'm supposed to think about it? Not sure. I'm really not quite certain about it. And I've talked about the financial insecurity and the waking up in the middle of the night and then the decision to make about retirement. I'm not sure. I think that people who have planned carefully and financially are very clear about their goals and about what they want to do when they retire. I'm watching this amongst my friends and my family. So I want you to know before you go any further that you're not alone and that this isn't a weakness. And what you're feeling, I feel, is just, it's not a flaw. This is normal because it's one of the most undocumented or less shared response about life's biggest transitions that don't really get talked about. Retirement is universal as a reward, as if you've met some kind of finish line, and it's supposed to be the beginning of the freedom, which for some people, I think it really is. And research shows that many retirees, particularly those who retire very freely and who have definite financial security and they know what they want to do, they want to travel, they want to explore, they want to do some creative things that they've never been able to do. All of these individuals, they had very strong social connections and they had amazing well-being into the years following retirement. But I don't think that's everyone's story, and I sometimes wonder if that will be my story, because I think sometimes the opportunity to retire could trigger something that feels like grief or depression. And I really wonder about that for myself because I do remember how I felt after my husband passed away. And it's really one of the most profound issues faced by retirees and what called the post-retirement identity crisis, where individuals struggle to redefine their sense of self once their professional roles have stopped. And this transition can lead to a lot of feelings of lost identity and what am I supposed to do now? And you feel vulnerable. And these issues of depression and anxiety and loneliness all show up. And in 2025, a study on retirement experiences showed that 20% of retirees said they weren't prepared for the emotional shift and how to fill their time and what their time meant to them. And this identity shift can be something that really stirs up unexpected emotions. It can be this quiet sadness that's hard to explain. I know that's how I felt when my husband passed away. I had this profound fog of sadness that I was in. And I felt that my purpose of life stopped and something was missing. So I know that it's important because I think it matters for us to understand the difference between grief and basically depression, because sometimes these can feel very similar, but they are quite different and they're not the same thing. The grief of transitioning is a normal process. I think most of us expect it. Sometimes there's a sadness that comes from changing and losing. I know I felt that when I made the decision not to continue to pursue professional opera singing, that I really wanted to be an improvisational artist. And I felt sad about letting go of singing some of the most amazing opera arias. But I had to recognize where I was. And so I shifted. And there was grief. And there was a different daily rhythm of how I organized my life and what I did and how I responded and connected to a new purpose and a new process. And I also know what clinical depression is and how different it is. Depression is something that I think is very underdiagnosed because it's a depressed mood and it's not always the most prominent thing that shows up. It often shows up as your sleep is disrupted or you had this prevailing fatigue, or you're not enjoying life. You've lost interest in everything, and your appetite is either very low or you're overeating. I know for me, when I have depression, is where's the cake? Depression and grief are very different, but sometimes these things get mashed together, so it can be tricky. And as we are older people, sometimes it's dismissed by our family and our friends. And so people just see it as acceptable ways of responding to life, but it's not. It's not a normal part of aging. Late life depression is too common, and it can be very debilitating and often very hard to get diagnosed and treated. And it's really linked to higher death and mortality, higher problems of health, and a greater risk of suicide. And I don't say that to be scary, because I do think older adults deserve the same urgency of care that we give to any serious health condition. And depression in our later life is serious. It's not something to push through alone. It is something to seek help and get treatment. And here's what the research says. And I really want you to hold on to this. 70% of older adults with depression treated long enough and with appropriate support, they recover. They recover from their episode of depression. I'd recover, but 70% is extraordinary. And that's hopeful. And that is what we know and what the evidence shows is the majority of people can recover with treatment and support. So let me share something else that I generally love because it gives us a way of dealing. In the 70s, a sociologist named Robert Atchley proposed that retirement unfolds in stages. And while the research has evolved since then, the emotional concept that he described is really still very relevant. Apparently, the first stage of retirement is like your honeymoon. Oh, you're great, you're euphoric, you've got all these plans, you're going to travel, you're going to do this, you're going to garden, you're going to take your art, you're going to do all this stuff because there's this liberation from having to be someplace at a certain time for a certain period of time. And then for some people comes the stage where it becomes no longer so euphoric, it's disenchanted. You feel emotionally let down. People are not corresponding back to you. Everyday life seems a little bit less challenging or interesting, or you don't have the same kind of, up and get going because there's no demand to be at a certain place at a certain time. All of this is being driven by ourselves. So sometimes initially retirees experience this honeymoon phase and they're great. And then they get to that second phase, and then there's feelings of boredom and too much watching television. There's no structure. There's this disillusionment and dissatisfaction. And that's when some mental health issues can show up. So I want you to really recognize that these feelings of sadness and grief and loneliness and feeling a sense of not knowing what normal is after you retire is expected, but they don't have to last, which is what I think is so amazing. That we can take over and reorient ourselves and create a new identity and a new stage, one that we are building, one that we're defining, and that we're doing it instead of a place that employed us, because we can make it shape as we want. But I think that not everyone knows how to get there. And it requires possibly doing some talk therapy. Instead of waiting for it to show up, you may have to reach out and connect with some people and get some professional support. So I want to spend a little time on the idea of regret, because I think when my husband passed away, there was a sense of regret that I did feel. I think it's one of the most powerful emotions that's lingered is this sense of regret, that I didn't say enough about how I loved him, how I cared about him. and how there were such happy times that we shared. So I think that sometimes when we make a decision to retire, there can be these feelings of regret that show up. And those can be things that maybe we need to, even when I think about retiring, I don't want to have a celebration. Isn't that horrible? I know that sounds like the typical way that people do it, but somehow I don't think I can handle it. I don't think that I can manage a retirement party or something. And it seems overwhelming to that idea. And I'm not sure, but I think the research indicates that when people retire and they have a strong tie to their work role, that's when they have a difficult challenge of dealing with their mental well being. And I think I may be one of those people. I'm not sure. I have such a strong identity of what I do at the medical center I work for and the research that I'm engaged in and how fascinated I am. It almost feels impossible to retire from it, but I can see how it could increase my depression and feelings of loneliness. And I think the cruelest part of regret is it often feels like I should have. I should have done this. I should have planned better. I should have done something different. But you know what? We need to let that go. Regret is not something that's done unless we choose to wallow in it. And I had to recognize that the regret that I felt sometimes with my husband and not telling him how much I loved him or cared about him, I think that came through my everyday actions. And that has given me a great deal of solace. And I think I can take that same idea when I think about the concept of retiring, is that I do feel any regret when I make that decision. I think I can recognize that when I was working full time and giving it my all, I was showing people how I was showing up. And there's no shoulds around that. I think everyone should work with a counselor, at least a little bit, or a therapist, or a trusted person like your clergy or pastor to help you think through it. Because if someone you know could possibly regret their idea of retiring and recognizing how hard they've worked in the past and how they deserve to shift and pivot and have a more relaxed experience in their life, or the opportunity to really explore something they've always been curious about and never have had the time. So I think it is a good idea to have a discussion with someone because that can be the most healing opportunity you can give yourself. So let's talk about what the research also says that helps. Again, name it and take it seriously. If you're experiencing any sadness that doesn't lift, you've lost interest in what gives you joy or pleasure, or your sleep or your appetite are changed and you don't feel like you want to hang out with people, you really need to reach out and talk to your primary care doctor. Getting a referral to some talk therapy or a counselor, those are things that are really needed as a genuine act of your own self-care. And not a lot of people do that because they see it as a stigma. And it's not. This is in no way anything you should feel ashamed about or that you need to hide, that it is normal to feel the need to get help. Because underdiagnosis and undertreatment of depression is real. It's very well documented. And what we do know is that we don't get enough improvement because the individuals don't seek help. So I want you to think about advocating for your own self to seek out help if you're experiencing anything that feels like depression at all. Please. The other thing is to reconnect with things that you feel a purpose with and not productivity. Connecting with things that make you feel purposeful Like when I thought about that, joining those teams that go to places that don't have good care, all the people who show up are volunteering their time and their clinical knowledge. And they go to these places, in places that are like these healthcare deserts where people have no option but to do without care. I loved this company and I thought, "Gee, I would love to do that, to show up and help people for a concentrated period of time for 3 or 4 days in a certain area. I could do that." I really thought that might be truly something I could do. And I journaled about it and I thought, wow, that would be awesome. It would give me an opportunity to travel, meet new people, and still connected to that kind of medical dynamic, which I enjoy. So the key is purposefulness and not busyness. To fill our days and our calendar with things that we feel connected to genuinely, and that we really take the time to ask ourselves about, if our work wasn't part of our day, what would we really want to be doing? What problems do we want to solve or connect with or create? And you know something? Those are things that live in all of us all the time. They don't go away. They just need a way to be expressed. And finally, you need to protect and prioritize your social connections. I think this is one area that really speaks to me because so many people have left New York, and I do feel a sense of isolation and needing to make new connections. And I'm really fearful if I retire, then I would have even fewer connections than I have now. Definitely, if you retire, you're not going to have that daily connection with your colleagues that you have all the time. So you have to be purposeful in making sure that you're reaching out to people instead of self-isolating. This is not something that is a soft finding. We know that social isolation in older adults is also associated with cognitive decline, cardiovascular disease, and a shortened lifespan. So, connection with other people is not optional, it is a biological need. So, that means we have to build and maintain good relationships. Whether we're working or we're retiring, we still need to have good relationships because it's key for our health. And finally, I'm in therapy and I don't think I'll ever stop therapy. I think that having therapy or having some kind of talk support, whatever it is that you think is useful for you, maybe it's your counselor, maybe it's your church or your pastor or someone you feel is there for you, because these things are critical for our well being. And I think getting someone that can help you understand and do problem solving and work out behavioral actions that you can engage in, they're very effective. And they can really manage that late life depression that may show up or grief. So work with a therapist who knows about older adult issues. And that is what will really be a welcomed identity for yourself when you go into something that's other than a working life. And remember, 70% of older adults who had depression, if they're treated and they have support, they totally recover. And that's not hope, that's real. It's an outcome of a finding, and that's very encouraging. So I just want to say, for those of us who are contemplating retirement and you're concerned about what you're going to be doing afterwards and missing the people that you worked with or not really knowing what to do with yourself, all of those feelings are real. I'm willing to take a look at this and reimagine, what could my life be when I let go of work? What would I be sad? Would I feel grief? Would I be some depression? What would I be doing? I think all of us should think about that, especially during this mental health month, to remind us that our mind is not separate from our bodies, that our emotional pain is not a weakness, And that asking for help from a doctor, a therapist, a trusted friend, a crisis line is one of the most courageous things that we can do for ourselves. If this episode resonated with you, please share, subscribe. I'd love for you to join me here each week. And if you're thinking about retirement or you are retired and how you tell yourself what you're doing or you're going to do when things get quiet or you're feeling alone and what you do to help yourself, I would love to hear what you do. And please think about subscribing because I have this wonderful newsletter called Glow Up, where we keep having this conversation with information that matters every single week. You're not alone. We're all in transition, really. So remember, you have this one precious life. Let's live it to the fullest into our 80s and 90s. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
So thank you so much for joining me at Healthy by George. I hope you found the information inspiring and that it encourages you on your wellness journey. Because remember, your body, your well-being are a most precious gift, and every tiny action taken daily can make a huge difference. I hope the information here is educational purposes and is not meant to replace your medical care. See your doctor and talk about what works for you. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me continuing creating content that inspires and empowers you to live your best life. Goodbye for now, and join me again at the next Healthy by George.